Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Duluth, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, Jacksonville, Florida, Tempe, Arizona, and Burbank, California. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. There was a hostage taken by Hamas, and it was erroneously reported that she was mistreated by the Hamas captors. And this is an example of that. They hit me all over my body, Israeli woman held captive by Hamas. I don't know how to say her name. It's Noa Argamani, I think. She was freed by the Israeli Special Forces in a raid on the Nusrat refugee camp in Gaza on June 8th. Well, it turns out that's a false story. That freed Israeli captive Noa Argamani says she was wounded by Israel and not by Hamas. Noa Argamani, an Israeli woman freed from Hamas captivity in Gaza in June, said on Friday that her injuries were caused by an Israeli airstrike during her rescue operation and not by Hamas attack. Speaking to diplomats from G7 countries in Tokyo on Wednesday, Argamani detailed her ordeal after she was taken captive by Palestinian armed groups during the October 7th attack. However, 2 days later, she issued a statement on Instagram saying that some of her remarks had been misquoted and taken out of context. Contrary to some Israeli media reports, Argamani clarified that she was not beaten or had her hair shaved by Palestinian fighters. I cannot ignore what happened here over the past 24 hours, taking my words out of context, she wrote, referring to the Israeli media coverage of her Tokyo speech. Hamas members did not hit me while I was in captivity, nor did they cut my hair. I was injured by the collapse of a wall caused by an Israeli Air Force pilot. As a victim of 7th of October, I refuse to be victimized once again by the media. Argamani's 26 years old, and she was among the 4 Israeli captives rescued during an Israeli attack on Nusrat and Deir al-Balah refugee camps in Gaza in June, which resulted in the deaths of at least 236 Palestinians, mostly women and children. In her testimony on Thursday, Argamani said her survival was a miracle. It's a miracle because I survived October 7th and I survived this bombing, and I also survived the rescue. This was what Noa Argamani said before her release from Gaza.
Well,
she said, I was located,
yeah.
hang on, I'll read it. She's saying it in Israel. I was located in a building. It was bombed by an IDF airstrike. F-16 fighter jet rockets hit us. 2 rockets exploded, and I did not.
One did not.
And one did not. In the building where we were in the El Qassam soldiers and 3 hostages. Myself, Etel Fursky, and Yoshi Serbi. After the building we were in was hit, we were all buried under the rubble. Qassam soldiers rescued my life and Etal. El Qassam soldiers. Later, we were not able to save Yossi. After many days, 2 nights, Etal and I were relocated to another place. While being transported, Etal was hit by an IDF airstrike, and he did not survive. So they killed 2 of the 3 hostages. I remain injured in my head. My head is full of shrapnel, and I have injuries in my body. Etel Fursky and Yoshi Shirabi, they died because of our own IDF airstrike. Stop this madness and bring us home to our families. While we are still alive, bring us home. So that's what really happened. And hostages weren't our top priority, is how Israel's bombing frenzy endangered captives in Gaza. And Max Blumenthal says Netanyahu has ordered the assassinations of the top 2 negotiators for Hamas, provoking Iran and its allies to retaliate, while his army has killed over 40 Israeli captives in Gaza through airstrikes. You'd have to have the IQ of a grapefruit to believe Israel's government actually wants to bring them home. So is this also creating problems, Chris? But first of all, let me ask you 2 questions. What was your experience? Because you lived there. I think you even speak Arabic. What of the Palestinian people and the Arab people in general? Are they the animals that people in the press want us to believe they are?
I spent 7 years in the Middle East, and I do speak Arabic, and I was the Middle East bureau chief of the New York Times.
No, the image of Muslims or Arabs is completely inverted to what they actually are. I was in all sorts of conflict zones, the wars in Iraq, Yemen, everywhere else. If there was one constant, it was that Arabs around me urged me to trust them, and I would say in every single case, I was never betrayed. It is, they are some of the most embracing, and I never understood why, because I'm an American. I mean, there's a little video the Amir Stein Center put out. It's a kind of animated thing about when I was taken prisoner in Basra during the Shiite uprising in Iraq, and I was eventually turned over to the secret police or the Muhabarat in Baghdad, and I hadn't eaten, and it's dawn, and I lean out the window, and the roofs are flat in Baghdad, so people come up, the women and children come up and bake the bread at dawn on the roofs, and I yell out, "I'm an American journalist, I'm a captain." Now remember, we had bombed their country, bombed all of their water purification plants, bombed their electrical systems, and I haven't eaten, and they give loaves of bread to their children to scamper across the roofs to feed me. So no, and that's what's so frustrating, that you can say things about Muslims in this country that you could never say about any other ethnic group. And that it's always been true, but especially turbocharged after 9/11. Netanyahu could have freed all of those hostages on October 8th. The demand was release the 5, now roughly 10,000 Palestinian prisoners, including women and children, many of whom have been detained without charge. That's what we want back. But he didn't. And it was a callous indifference to the hostages. They were taken for that prisoner exchange. That's why they were taken. And we don't know. I've heard 40, I've heard more, but certainly the biggest killer of Israeli hostages has been the Israeli military and the Israeli Air Force, without question.
So, I mean, even on October 7th, we now find out that it was the Israeli army and the Air Force themselves that killed plenty of those people.
They did. And, that's another failure of the U.S. press, because that was reported in the Israeli press, in Aretz, in 972, this left-wing magazine, and even the conservative paper Idiot Haranot. They all reported it. That is yet to appear, as far as I've seen, in the pages of the New York Times, because they were flying blind. The resistance took out the electronic monitors. So for 7 or 8 hours, the Israeli did not know what was going on. They were sending up tanks and Apache helicopters and missiles, and any car that was going to Gaza, many of whom had hostages, they just blew up. And that was the other thing. I mean, having covered, it's War 101. They were going into these kibbutzes, and there were giant shell holes in the sides of these buildings, blackened buildings. Well, those could not have been caused by Hamas. Hamas had small arms. They never asked the questions. You had twisted hunks of metal of vehicles that had obviously been obliterated by cruise missiles. It was never, and they still haven't. The American press, I mean, the Israeli press has done a better job of reporting it than the American press. So yeah, there were certainly, not denying that there were not, atrocities committed by Hamas. There were, but there was clearly a significant number of people, including bombing Hedges, which is the crossing. They bombed their own central, because it had been taken over by Hamas, knowing that there were a large number of Israeli soldiers on the inside, and they were all killed.
And that's all been
in the Israeli press.
And that's called the Hannibal directive, right?
Yeah, it's the Hannibal directive, based on. So Hannibal was the great Carthaginian general that the Romans hounded throughout his life, and finally a Roman legion surrounded him. I think it was in what is today modern-day Syria, I think. And he committed suicide rather than surrender to the Roman legions. And so the idea is that we just take them out rather than allow them to be hostages.
And when I saw all those cars that were, first of all, the Hamas, they attacked them in hang gliders and, Adidas sweatpants. I mean, these guys, I saw all these hundreds of cars that were just wiped out. And I knew that that couldn't have been done by them. And of course, it was done by the Israeli military. And then what did they do? They buried them. Did you know that they buried the evidence of what they did? Yeah.
Well, that's also been true in Gaza. There are all sorts of mass killings, and they're uncovering, especially like around Al Shifa Hospital, some of these hospitals where they have just been, they hauled everyone out and executed them. Then we are now they're uncovering these mass graves throughout Gaza. Yeah.
Do you have any insight into what's happening in Israel? I've been told that it's close to a civil war over certain things. And of course, Netanyahu, we've reported, was very unpopular before the war started. And in fact, they were protesting outside his house for like 30, 40 weeks in a row because of the way he rigged their own Supreme Court. And so do you think if there wasn't this war, there would be strife inside of Israel itself?
Yes, but there's almost complete unanimity in terms of the genocide in Gaza. I mean, you look at Israeli media and they make fun of the Palestinian deaths. They are now, there's this guy who's been accused of rape, and he's kind of become a minor celebrity within Israel and is lauded. So, but Israel was torn apart on the eve because Netanyahu was destroying the independence of the judiciary to protect himself. He has 3 cases of corruption which he could go to jail for. So, but in terms of obliterating the Palestinian people, there are no divisions. There are divisions over civil society for Jews within Israel, but not in terms of what's happening in Gaza. I mean, a significant percentage of the Israeli public thinks the Israeli military should be even harsher. I forget the numbers.
So I'm just blown away by that because you don't want to paint with such a broad brush, but it seems like if you are an Israeli, that you are a bigot, you are a racist against these people, and you value their lives less than obviously, right? I mean, how does that happen to a whole culture?
Because it's indoctrinated. And Ilan Pappé, again, the great Israeli historian, wrote a book on it. It begins in preschool, a deification of the military, a demonization of the Palestinians, the idea of Jews as eternal victims. That's why these elite IDF units, I've been there at Auschwitz, so they all fly them to Auschwitz, and they get sworn in, and they go, the rest of the world is trying to put us into ovens. So it's a long period of indoctrination. I forget the name of Pappé's book, but he wrote a book on it. He's Israeli, by the way.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, it's the culmination of years and years and years of racist indoctrination. Yeah. And that's what we're watching. That's what's happened.
Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Duluth, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, Jacksonville, Florida, Tempe, Arizona, and Burbank, California. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.